What's up, everybody? So this is going to be a competitive guide on the brand new hyped up Violet exclusive Pokemon Ceruledge. So let's just hop straight into it. So Ceruledge is a Fire Ghost Pokemon, which is a typing that Game Freak seems to really be messing with recently, with stuff like Hisuian Typhlosion, Blacephalon, Alolan Marowak. We got multiple Fire Ghost Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet too. I mean, they seem to really like the typing, and honestly, I can't complain. I like the typing too. It's pretty cool typing. Getting into the typing defensively, there's a lot of good and there's some bad too. It's definitely an awkward defensive typing, but with the ghosts typing, you're going to get those fighting and normal immunities, which are really nice, as well as a 4 times resistance to bug, which is nice, especially in singles because there's so much U-turn, as well as some common resistances with stuff like fire, ice, fairy, etc. But the weaknesses, dark, ghost, ground, water weaknesses plus a stealth rock weakness, it's definitely not the best, but there's a ton of resistances here, so it's not too bad overall. Offensively though, it's fantastic. Ghost has been, in my opinion, the best offensive typing in the game for multiple generations now, and then Fire is also a pretty good offensive typing as well. So like we've seen with stuff like Blacephalon in the past, that pretty much exclusively just uses stabs. Like Blacephalon just uses Fire and Ghost moves, and that thing is still a complete problem to switch into. So Fire Ghost, it definitely gets the job done. It definitely gets the job done. Looking at Ceruledge's stats, defensively, we have 75 HP, 80 defense, 100 speed F. So the physical bulk is it's kind of mediocre, but 100 speed F is definitely it's quite solid for an offensive Pokemon. We also have 125 attack, which is definitely the highlight here. 125 attack, we'll take that all day. 60 special attack, doesn't matter. We're not going to run any special sets on this Pokemon. And then 85 speed is, it's not the best. 85 speed is definitely not the best in this metagame for sure. As an offensive Pokemon with 85 speed, to me, you either need to offer a lot of defensive utility or you need to have insane wall breaking potential. I think Ceruledge is pretty good despite its speed, but the speed definitely doesn't do it any favors. 85 speed is definitely not the best. It's definitely not the best. It could be worse, but it's not the best. Looking at the abilities, we have Flash Fire and Weak Armor. I think there's definitely merit to running either of these abilities. So, Flash Fire, yes, you already resist fire, but having a complete immunity to a typing is always going to be something useful. Especially if you're gonna Terra off of your fire type. So, if you're gonna Terra into Ghost or Fighting or any other type, getting to keep a fire immunity is just nice. If you go Fighting Terra, for example, with Flash Fire, you can actually check stuff like Chiyu. Immunity abilities, type immunity abilities are always just gonna be pretty good. Stuff like Levitate, Volt Absorb, Storm Drain, those are always just gonna be pretty solid abilities. But I will say, personally, I kind of like Weak Armor a little bit more, generally. So, Weak Armor, if you don't know how it works, if you get hit by a physical attack, you lose 1 stage of defense, but you get 2 stages of speed. So, this thing doesn't have the best physical bulk, but like we talked about earlier, you get a lot of resistances. So, there's a lot of Pokemon that you can actually proc Weak Armor on, like the U-Turners or Physical Fairies or different Pokemon that would you could actually take the hit and get the +2 speed. And when you get the +2 speed, that mitigates what, in my opinion, is the biggest flaw of Ceruledge, which is the mediocre speed tier. And at +2, that's when you're scariest. That's when you can actually just win the game. So for me, getting access to Weak Armor is nice. Yes, Flash Fire is a pretty good ability that's consistent. And I would still say it's personal preference, because there are going to be some situations where Flash Fire could come in clutch, but I'll say that I'm a Weak Armor guy. I'm not going to lie. But sometimes, honestly, you can reap the benefits of both abilities at the same time. If you're Weak Armor, and let's say you Terra off of your Fire type, Pokemon might still be afraid of clicking the Fire move into you just because they know you could be Flash Fire. Similarly, you could be Flash Fire, and maybe a Pokemon that would normally just go U-turn on you will just hard swap because they're like, okay, I don't want to give this thing +2 speed if it's weak armor. So sometimes just having access to both the abilities is kind of nice. So you know, it helps. It helps. Just having the threat of both is nice. It's nice for sure. So looking at what I personally think is Ceruledge's best set, it's Swords Dance set. We have Swords Dance, Shadow Sneak, Bitter Blade or Flare Blitz, and Close Combat. You might look at this and you might be like, oh, okay, so where's Shadow Claw? That's like our strongest ghost move. Like, what are we doing? Where's the claw? But I think it's hard to fit Claw on this set. I think all the other moves are a little bit more important. So Shadow Sneak, to me, in this metagame especially, priority is king. Having access to stat priority is just something you want to have. Like, Shadow Sneak is going to be your main tool against a lot of offensive teams because you're coming in with that 85 speed. That's how you're going to threaten a lot of these faster Pokemon. Bitter Blade and Flare Blitz. So Bitter Blade, if you don't know what it is, that is Ceruledge's signature move. It is a 90 base power fire move that heals for half the damage dealt. Think of it like something like Drain Punch or Leech Life. But those are like 75 and 80 BP respectively, and this is 90, so it's even better. Bitter Blade and Flare Blitz, I personally like Bitter Blade more. Flare Blitz obviously is just going to be the strongest fire move you have access to. I will say I would warn against Flare Blitz, especially on Life Orb sets, because if you're going to run a Pokemon that's weak to rocks with no boots and is running a Life Orb, so you're hurting yourself with that, and you're going to run Flare Blitz, which is a high recoil move as well. I mean, you're just begging for your Ceruledge to last like 2 turns because it just kills itself. So I would rather run Bitter Blade, especially with Life Orb, because you get to mitigate a lot of the damage that you do to yourself with Life Orb with the Bitter Blade healing. But either way, whichever way you go, you want a fire move. You're going to want a fire move, and then Close Combat. So Close Combat lets you touch stuff like Garganacl, stuff like Tyranitar, stuff like Hydreigon, stuff like Roaring Moon, even things like Cyclizar. These are all Pokemon that if you don't have Close Combat, they will actually they'll take advantage of you, they'll do whatever they want, they don't care about you. Like, you're walled. Getting access to Close Combat as a fire ghost type is so huge. Like, Blacephalon would have killed to have a strong fighting move like this. And I just think it's important to have Close Combat. And Close Combat is stronger than Shadow Claw anyway, even with stab. Like, Shadow Claw is only 70 BP. It's 105 BP accounting for your 50% stab boost. That's still weaker than Close Combat. Like, Shadow Claw is just not that strong of a move. Like, you will miss Shadow Claw a little bit if you're, like, playing against, like, a Toxapex or a Dragonite or something, because, like, then the strongest move you're going to hit those things with is Sneak. But, like, I mean, it is what it is. You gotta lose something, and I think Shadow Claw is the easiest thing to lose. And Shadow Claw's not that strong anyway, like I was saying. It's not like... I mean, even with Shadow Claw, you're not necessarily going to beat those things 1v1 anyway. So, to me, the set that's on screen is what I prefer. But if you want to replace one of these moves with Shadow Claw, that is something you could also do. As far as natures go, Adamant or Jolly are pretty much going to be what you go with all the time, one of those two. Adamant's like fine if you're just like, hey, I want to be as strong as possible, and maybe you're like, hey, I'm gonna be relying on Shadow Sneak in a lot of matchups anyway, I just want to be as strong as possible, I'm gonna go Adamant. I think that's fair. Jolly, I guess if you do want to go like Adamant, you got to think about what you lose by not going Jolly. So, for example, stuff like Titan, you would suddenly speed tie, like outside of Hail. I don't know how relevant that is, but that's something to think about. Stuff like Armourouge, like max speed Armourouge will be faster than you. Max speed D-Knight will be like faster than you. Max speed like Gyarados will be faster than you. Obviously, if you're Adamant, then you're not going to get the opportunity to speed tie like Jolly Ceruledges. So those are things to think about. I think the most important thing is probably actually just Goldango, because Goldango, as of the time I'm recording this, is like the second most used Pokemon in OU. And that's 1 speed point lower than you. So, you know, that's something to think about, especially because Shadow Sneak, even if your Band-Aid does not kill Goldango outright, like you need an SD to kill Goldango with Shadow Sneak. So, and even, I think if your Boots, if you're not like Spell Tag or Life Orb, I think even at +2 it's a roll. So, you know, that's something you might want to think about. If like those Pokemon are things where you're like, I need my Ceruledge to outspeed this, you could just go Jolly to feel comfortable. But Adamant's always, you know, good if you're just like, hey, I want as much power as possible. As for the item, I personally would go Life Orb on this because I think even at +2, like sometimes you struggle to kill some things with Boots. Boots is obviously like never gonna be a bad item on a Rock's weak Mondo, so Boots is always, Boots is always an option. And then as for the ability, I think on this set in particular, I really would suggest weak armor because like if you get hit with a physical move and you get an SD off and you're +2 attack, +2 speed, that's when it's like, oh, it's party time. That's when you're gonna be as scary as you could possibly be. So I like having the threat of weak armor on my SD sets. But Flashfire, I have it on here as well. It's an option. Alright, so looking at the choice set, pretty similar overall, except since you're not running SD, now you actually do have room for Shadow Claw. This set, obviously with Banded, you get a little bit more power, like immediate power. Like if you're trying to use Ceruledge as more of like a revenge killer to just like pick things off with like Banded Shadow Sneaks and you just want more damage up front, then this is an option. Scarf, you would run similar moves on Scarf, except I guess on Scarf you have the option of maybe like replacing a move with like Destiny Bond, because like fast Destiny Bond in a pinch is like a nice option. I like Scarf a lot less though. I just think you're pretty weak with Scarf. You're pretty weak with Scarf, and Scarf Shadow Claw is like marginally stronger than Banded Shadow Sneak anyway. I think if you're gonna go choice, I would go Banded. Like Banded at least is like genuinely like annoying to switch into because it's just strong, but I'm gonna be honest, like if I find out a Ceruledge is Banded, it's like whew, a sigh of relief. Like SD is like way scarier to me. Like I feel like SD has a way higher chance of actually like winning the game in a way that Banded, I feel like, just doesn't. Like it's pretty prediction reliant, and even then, like there's like, I don't know. It's not a bad set. It's not a bad set. But I think like the first set, I do think SD weak armor is just like the scariest that Ceruledge ever gets. And I think if you're running anything else, it's not as good. But obviously, if you just want something that can come in and like poke holes into teams and just like wear stuff down, for some of your other Pokemon to potentially sweep, then I could see this potentially being like better for your team. As for Terra types, I think Ghost and Fighting are the ones I like the most. I think just having like access to like stab close combat is really nice, or just having like those adaptability boosted Shadow Sneaks is really nice, especially on the SD sets. But Fire is also pretty good. Like obviously like boosted Flare Blitz with Terra Fire is like the strongest thing you're gonna get. Like that just destroys some mons. I think those three are definitely like the three to go. Probably depends on your team, but those three are probably the best options. As for other moves, I feel like Ceruledge, I think you just want close combat to give you that perfect coverage. Like you're gonna have perfect coverage with close combat, fire move, ghost move all the time. So it's hard to like suggest other coverage moves. Like obviously you do get stuff like Iron Head and X Scissor and Dragon Claw, and maybe in like some draft situations like they can actually outperform like close combat as a coverage option. But I think like for like OU, like generally close combat's gonna be your go-to. You do get some other like cool moves like Wisp and screens and stuff, but I don't know if this Pokemon has like either the speed or the bulk to reliably pull off some of the supportive stuff, even in VGC. So it's hard for me to really recommend them, but those are nice options you have. Like more good moves is not a bad thing. So I think at the end of the day, Ceruledge, I think the biggest weakness is probably not having a really strong ghost move and then just the 85 speed tier. The SD sets are the sets I like the most, but I have to be honest, like there are some times where you're not actually going to have opportunities to get an SD off. You're not actually going to have opportunities to get weak armor procced, and this thing comes into the game with 85 speed, which right now like doesn't really cut it. Like there's going to be some games against some offensive teams and they have like 4 strong Pokemon and they're all faster than you, and it's going to be like, oh man, it's hard for me to use this. But at the end of the day, this thing has 125 attack and perfect coverage with stab priority. Like this is something that when I see it on the enemy team, I'm always gonna respect this. Like this is something that can put a lot of work in, And that's why I think even with like a couple of flaws, like this is a Pokemon that's worth putting on your team in Scarlet and Violet. So that's going to conclude this competitive guide. I'm going to have competitive guides on every single brand new Pokemon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So make sure to stick around the channel, like the video, subscribe, do all that. And I'll see y'all next time.